acid. Doesn't kill the bees. The mites die and fall off, But I often joke saying, well, the mites have a right to live. I mean, what are we as humans going in there over engineering things and deciding what lives and dies? The bees are going to live, man. Winnie the Pooh, honey, they got a lot going for them. The mites, get rid of them. They just kill. So I take a cynical, lighthearted look at the hobby. And I'm a little bit skeptical of people that get on a soapbox and preach about how great beekeeping is for the environment, how great they are. Because there's a lot of things we do in beekeeping. Don, we feed them white sugar. We steal their honey, and then we boil white sugar and feed them that to keep alive for the wintertime. We fumigate and kill the mites. Now, I don't want to be negative. It's a great hobby. But the book presents a different look at it, saying that, hang on, this isn't natural to take a wild creature, put it in a box in a way that you'll be able to steal its honey. So I'm all for bees and beekeeping and planting flowers for bees. But
yeah, it's an interesting discussion because it brings into play all of the different views on farming and what's the best kind of farming.
We've embraced monoculture. Bees love a variety of plants, to pick from. Yet now the massive fields that go on for as far as the eye can see, just one crop. And then it is something called a neonicotinoid, which is the type of insect repellent or the type of insecticides that's used. And, so between monoculture and these insecticides and mites and get this, Don, radio waves in the air, like FM radio, AM radio, microwave towers, Wi-Fi. You got to believe that these bees who are so finely tuned so everything, pollution, climate change, everything's going against these little guys. And beekeeping is great, but it's not natural. It's not the natural way. We're interfering to get honey, Yeah.
So are there beekeepers that do it naturally?
Yes, there are. There are proponents that say, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not even going to build the wooden frames that you see. Those are really made so that we can easily extract the honey. Well, that's unnatural. Now, if you're a purist, Don, you would you could just get a clump of bees and let them all just kind of live together under, it's called a top bar hive. It's a different construction, and you're still keeping them a little bit unnaturally, but you're letting them create the comb, and it'll come out in wild shapes. And, and then you go, okay, now what do I do with it? You want to extract the honey. And there are beekeepers that'll say, look, I'm not going to treat for varroa mites. I'm not going to try to kill that invasive parasite. And they're going to say, I'm not going to feed my bees sugar water in the winter to help them live. And I'm not going to do the other things that we do that are unnatural. And you know what happens to them? These beekeepers, man, they don't get much honey. It's detrimental. So it's great. It's a purist. I'm a big fan. But in the final analysis, most beekeepers do it because they love the hobby and they like the activity and doing it. But you want the reward of honey at the end. I mean, I've been skunked for many seasons where I've done all the work. My bees have died and haven't gotten 1 ounce of honey. And then I talk about in the book, you get stung. It's very expensive. You got to buy the suit, you got to buy the equipment, you got to buy the oxalic acid, you got to buy the smoker. So I've had years where, gee, I've gotten 20 pounds of honey. Well, Dave, what did it cost you to do your beekeeping? Well, it cost about $2,000. So what's the jar worth? Well, this jar is worth $100. Hope you enjoy it. Now that's a cynic's point of view, but I'm trying to, if you read the book, there's a lot of real positive, cool things I talk about, but I don't think there's many books that talk about just how painful a sting is. And how there's the sting of the expense and there's the physical sting of it landing one in your face.
Yeah, I saw a couple of pictures of you with some stings in your face, and it's not something I want.
Well, I wrote a chapter called I've looked at bees from both sides now, and it's taken up on the Judy Collins or Joni Mitchell song. And when you discover a bee on the inside of your veil, usually when they're crawling around the veil, which is a mesh you can see through in your face, you're seeing their stomach and their 6 legs, okay? And there's many times where you've got 20 or 30 bees crawling around there. The second that you look up and you see the other side of the bee, like you're seeing its wings, you can't see it because it's on the inside. You know what I mean? That is frightening. And I've had them crawl in my ears, crawl up my nose, crawl in my mouth. And then the other thing is sweat goes downhill. When you feel a bead of sweat going up, you realize that's not sweat, that's a bee.
Yeah.
And facial stings are the worst, I mean, man, you get one near your eye and it swells up like you're a prize fighter that was battling it out the night before. And you look like a biggest dork on earth. It takes 3 days for the swelling to go down.
So I'm curious, do the bees know that you're their pal when you're working on a hive?
That's a great question. We believe, and my girlfriend Jeannie, who's an excellent beekeeper, she understands the personality of each hive. Like she has a dozen hives. That one's aggressive. That one's passive. That one they're quite lazy. This one's dysfunctional. That one's passive. So she goes into each hive with the knowing that. But she also goes in very relaxed. And Don, there are some beekeepers that are so relaxed and so at one with the bees. This blows me away. They don't wear any beekeeping suit or gloves or a mask or anything. They can just go in and handle the bees with nothing. The bees pick up on it. I have to do everything I can to protect every square inch of my body with a suit and tape. And, I don't want any of them getting in my suits. But the bees pick up on the vibes that you're sending off. If you're at one with them and zen and quiet and moving slowly, you ought to get away with it. So they pick up on it. Yeah.
In your last chapter, you talk about the collapse of the hives, and I guess I'm curious on a couple of things. What have you learned? I mean, it's got to be heartbreaking and very frustrating.
It is.
And why do you keep doing it?
I'm doing it less. I'm beekeeping with Jeannie now, and during COVID, it was a nice distraction, something nice to do. It keeps your mind off of things. It's a hobby. But the last chapter I wanted to, you say the question, what have you reflected on? In the big picture, I talk a lot about almonds. I love almonds, and they're great to eat. I put them in my smoothies in the morning. Almonds can't exist without bees. There's a real very important relationship between the Kirkland almonds that you buy at Costco in that big bag for $19 and bees. And what happens is that the almond crops, most of them are in a region of Southern California where they grow them worldwide. Like 80% of the world's almonds come from this geographical area in Southern California. I've been down there. And the people that own the almond crops pay bee farmers to bring the bees in all over North America to pollinate these almonds. So bee farms that are commercial farms probably couldn't exist without the almond income they get. So the bees are trucked from all over North America, from Peace River, from Mississippi, from Florida, from Missouri, they're trucked into this area to pollinate the almond crops. And what you said about monoculture, okay? But what I've learned, Don, is that we are the enemy. I mean, I love cheap almonds and I buy them. And the fact that I buy them and encourage that continues this cycle of unnaturalists. The world has too many people. That's the problem, So it has to be fed. And there is no solution because we can't cut down from monoculture, and we can't cut down from this crazy way we grow our foods, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to keep up with feeding people. And almonds are a good example because I'm the worst culprit. I buy them, I eat them, but they require incredible amounts of pollination from bees, which is so unnatural to take. Let's say you take 300 beehives, put them on the back of a flatbed truck and truck them halfway across the country. No wonder we have diseases and problems. It's unnatural. But as long as our population in the world continues to grow, come up with another solution. It's overpopulation, and the bees have an interesting way of dealing with it. The overpopulation, when their hive gets too big, they just form another hive and swarm, and they split. They go, it's too crowded here, and that's what a bee swarm is. When you go out for a walk in the neighborhood and you see a bunch of bees hanging on a tree, that's their overpopulation that they've created. But they got other places to go. We don't.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I've seen a bee swarm, other than watching the queen flying on YouTube, which was an interesting.
Did you see the mating one where the queen flies and has sex in midair? And
I did. That was
impregnates her, and then the minute he pulls out, he falls to the ground and dies. And she flies back to the beehive with 3 or 4 million sperm in her. And then she doesn't fly or leave the hive for another 3 or 4 years. She just lays eggs. The average bee only lives 5 or 6 weeks. The queen lives for 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
But the whole problem we have in the world is with overcrowded, overpopulation, and we've had to adapt. And all the adaptations we make are not good for the bees, and they're an intricate part of our ecosystem. And I don't know what the answer is. I wish there was less people in the world, because I think we could get things back to a better equilibrium with
let's talk about bees and climate change.
Well, the spring is happening a lot earlier, and so how does that affect the bees? And there are PhDs and, people a lot smarter than me that are just studying just that. And it's not good news. Any of these studies, it doesn't come out well for the bees. So yeah, climate change is affecting the bees, but you'd have to asked someone at the PhD with an apiarist of SFU, because I'm the keystone cop of beekeeping. I mean, don't ask me anything intellectual or deep. I can tell you funny stories about feeding them sugar water that I boiled too hot and I burnt their proboscises off. When you feed them in the wintertime.
Will you keep doing bees?
Don, I don't know. To be honest with you, it has been extremely interesting. With the book published, I certainly will do it for a few more years while I'm promoting the book. And I'll tell you one other thing is they kind of tie you down. Like, I'm kind of semi-retired and we like to go on trips. And like any hobby, if you take it seriously, you can't just leave them for 3 months. They don't go on autopilot. You have to feed them and you have to tend them, to go through them. And my girlfriend Jeannie and I were just talking about this. We're doing some plans for this summer, and it's kind of like, well, we can't go then. We got the bees. So if you know what it's like when you got a dog and you
write
love
about that, and you talked about that in other places where once you're committed, you're committed.
Exactly. Are you going to do it or not do it? You're in or out. If you're going to do it properly. But when you see a hive swarming, that means the beekeeper hasn't been paying attention and doing a good job. That shouldn't happen. And that's a nuisance in the neighborhood. You know what I mean? Nobody wants to have 30,000 bees descend upon their backyard branch because the guy that lives 3 doors down is keeping bees. And he should have detected a number of telltale signs within the hive that indicated this hive is about to swarm. You have to do something. You have to split it yourself and control it. So there's a degree of, like, the municipalities in North America, most of them have now allowed beekeeping within the city. It used to be illegal 20 or 30 years ago. Vancouver changed the laws, but it's like keeping chicken, keeping dogs. You need to be a responsible beekeeper. Yeah. And I love it. I've learned a ton. Probably always keep a hive or two, it's nice to have. But once you start having, 15 or 18 hives like my girlfriend Jeannie has, it's a lot of work. I try to help her, and it's been a great hobby, but will I keep on doing it? Maybe not.
Time will tell. I was fascinated, years ago, I talked with some folks that were raising bees in the downtown east side, and I can't remember the name of the organization. But
Hives for Humanity, possibly.
Yeah, it was actually.
Yeah.
And they, I was fascinated because based on the area of the city that the hive was in, it would change the taste of the honey.
Exactly. So first of all, 2 things. It's people are really interested in wine, and they like to talk about this being a Pinot Grigio or that being a Cab Sauv based on the grape. Well, the honey's exactly the same way. So based on where the bees are, no 2 jars will taste the same. Or no 2 hives, So the flavor of my hive in Ladner tastes different than the honey we extract. It is symptomatic of the plants in the area, whatever the plants in the area. So I've got a lot of, certain type of potato crop behind me, and that's where, or maybe it's clover, or maybe it's dandelions, but no 2 jars taste the same. And I'm also blown away that bees can survive in downtown Vancouver. I mean, the first question is, okay, what are the plants here? Well, they find it. And, I found this really interesting. The city of New York, the New York City Police Department, Manhattan, the cops in New York, have a full-time apiarist on staff that is an officer dedicated to controlling bylaws and dealing with bee problems. So you keep bees in Manhattan, they live. Don't ask me how, but they also create problems because when they swarm, they might swarm onto the door of a taxi cab and just kind of cling onto that, call the cops, So bees create a bit of a problem within an urban environment. But how do they get enough? Now, this is important, Don. They can fly up to 5 kilometers. So there's all these facts and figures. So when we talk about the downtown east side, within anywhere you are, 5 kilometers is a pretty big range that you can make it to a park. You can make it to a garden over on Venable Street or Pender or on Renfrew, that you'll get it. And when they get back to the hive, like I said, they tell the other bees where to go. They dance in a figure-8 pattern. And when they get back to the hive, so a bee leaves the hive, finds some really good nectar over on Renfrew Street. He's at the downtown east side. She comes back. And she says, now I got to tell the rest of the bees, how am I going to do it? I can't talk. So she waggled. It's called the Waggle dance. And she marches in a figure-8 or does a dance in a figure-8. And the axis of the figure-8 points to where that good foraging is, the good flowers are. The velocity that she flaps her wings gives an indication of the distance. But this is the type of nerdy thing that when you're a beekeeper, the scientist named Karl von Frisch in 1880 in Vienna identified it. Can you imagine 1880 studying bees? He figured out like these bees are communicating to one another. So we will sometimes go through our hives, pick the frame out, and see a dance doing a figure-8, or a bee doing a figure-8. and we'll watch the other bees all rubbing up against that bee to get the information.